old are you?
6.5. 6.
And what grade are you in?
First grade. First grade?
Do you like school?
Yeah. No.
Why do you like school?
Because I like to play with my friends at recess.
Why don't you like school?
Because I have to do a lot of stuff and my little sister's really cute and I want to spend more time with my little sister.
How long does it take you to do your homework? A long time or a short time?
Usually 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know, sort of in the middle.
Do you have a hard time with your homework?
Sometimes.
How do you do on tests?
Good. Well, I usually get A's but not A pluses, so I don't know. And I almost get every single one right.
Well, aren't you still proud of yourself for getting A's?
I don't know, I just feel normal.
You just feel normal? You don't feel proud of yourself?
No, I just feel normal.
Okay. Do you have a lot of friends?
Yeah. No.
How do you feel about having a lot of friends?
Happy.
How do you feel about not having a lot of friends?
Lonely.
Do you get invited to parties?
Yeah. Not usually.
Do you ever get bullied?
No. Sometimes.
Do you think you are smart?
Yeah. I don't know.
Do you think you are handsome?
Yeah.
Do you think you are pretty?
Sometimes.
What do you like about yourself?
How smart I am and how good I draw. I like myself because I like Jesus and God and they're really important.
Is there anything that you dislike about yourself?
Nope. Sometimes I be bad.
How do you be bad?
By giving attitude to my mom.
Why do you think you give attitude?
I don't know, sometimes I just get into moods. It depends on how good the day is. When I have a bad day, then I get all grumpy and negative. And when I have a good day, then I get all positive and happy.
What do you want other kids like your age to know that don't have ADHD? What do you want them to know about the kids that do have ADHD?
That they are better at listening than them, and that they could help them.
And how can they help the kids with ADHD?
By telling them that whatever you do, it's still right because you tried your best.
What most people know, or think they know, about attention deficit disorder, or ADD, is that it's used to describe someone who can't stay focused, and when they really can't focus, they have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. This continuum from one to the next isn't quite how it works, though. ADD and ADHD are actually synonymous, as in they're the same. ADD is an outdated term used prior to 1987, after which it evolved into ADHD to encompass more of the symptoms that people with ADHD often experience, which, in addition to being inattentive, includes both hyperactivity and impulsiveness. So somebody might be diagnosed with ADHD because they have symptoms related to not being able to pay attention, but they might also be diagnosed with ADHD if they have symptoms related to being overly active and impulsive. They might also have ADHD if they have symptoms of both. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, the most recent update being in 2013, ADHD is split into 3 subtypes: inattentive, hyperactive impulsive, or both. Inattentive and hyperactive impulsive have a set of 9 symptoms each. For example, someone with the inattentive subtype might make careless mistakes, or not listen, or be easily distracted. And someone with a hyperactivity and impulsive subtype might fidget, or squirm around, or get up from their chair often. Now, you might be thinking that everyone fidgets now and then, right? Well, a diagnosis is given when someone has 6 of the 9 symptoms for either subtype for at least 6 months. Most commonly, though, children have symptoms of both subtypes, and therefore have the combined subtype. Since ADHD is considered a neurodevelopmental disorder, the symptoms also have to have started between age 6 and 12, and the behavior can't be appropriate for their age. Alright, but what causes someone to be hyperactive, or impulsive, or inattentive? Well, as you might guess, it's pretty complicated, and we don't really know. Probably a lot of different factors, and ultimately they all fall into some combination of environmental and genetic factors. One interesting clue to a genetic component of ADHD is looking at families. For example, a child with a sibling that's been diagnosed with ADHD is more likely to develop it themselves. Furthermore, if those siblings are identical twins, meaning they have the same DNA, their chances of developing ADHD is considerably higher. Having identical DNA doesn't mean that the twin is definitely going to develop ADHD though, which again suggests that both genetic factors and environmental factors play a part. As to a specific gene, it's probably not one single gene that leads to ADHD, but rather multiple genes that determines how severe their symptoms are. These genes likely influence the production or regulation of the brain's neurotransmitters, which are signaling molecules in the brain that are released by one neuron and received by receptors of another neuron. This movement of a neurotransmitter from neuron A to neuron B is basically a message being relayed. It's like the neurons are talking. Dopamine is a specific neurotransmitter that gets released when the brain's involved with behaviors like getting a reward, taking a risk, and being impulsive. Norepinephrine is another neurotransmitter involved in attention and arousal. It's thought that lower amounts of these two neurotransmitters floating around contributes to symptoms of ADHD. The reason why these neurotransmitters might be down in the first place is still not well understood, and research remains ongoing.
So, to help you understand what it's like inside the brain of your ADHD person, we reached out to our community of ADHD brains as well as the community at understood.org to ask how they explain it. For example, fun fact, despite the name, we don't actually have a deficit of attention. When we forget to change the laundry or have trouble focusing in class, it's because our brains have trouble regulating or effectively shifting our attention. So sometimes our brains jump from one thing to the next, and other times our brains actually zero in or hyper-focus on one thing, and it can be hard for us to pull ourselves away. As Eric Peterson puts it, neurotypical brains have a 1 through 10 dial they use to regulate their attention. With ADHD brains, our dials have 2 options, random and 15. And this applies to all aspects of our lives. The ability to regulate attention is part of something called the executive function system. It's kind of like our brain's self-management system, what allows us to plan, prioritize, and sustain effort toward a goal, say, making dinner, without getting sidetracked. It's what allows us to inhibit, or not act on, our impulses and ignore distractions so we can stay on task and switch when it's time to switch. In the ADHD brain, executive functions develop much more slowly than in neurotypical brains. And we have a deficit in the brain chemicals that help them function. So we usually know what to do and have the best intentions, but our executive function system isn't always developed or functioning well enough to effectively help us do it. And it's just as frustrating for us as it is for anyone else. Haley Melville explains it like this. Your brain is like a secretary, and you're the CEO in a meeting, doing a task. In a neurotypical brain, their secretary greets guests, potential distractions, lets them know that the CEO is in a meeting, and either encourages them to make an appointment or shows them the door. My secretary either lets everyone into the meeting, nor lets no one in, even if it's something important. Another executive function is working memory. That's our ability to temporarily hold information in our head so we can work with it. Like, look at a recipe and then remember the steps while we cook. It's our brain's version of RAM. Everyone has a limited capacity of working memory, but it's often more limited in those with ADHD, which is one reason we might blurt out an answer before we forget it, or ask you to repeat what you just said. Timothy Warnke says, "It's like my brain is a whiteboard, and I have to write down everything that's happening right away. But I write kind of big, so pretty soon I have to erase a bunch of stuff to make more room." By the way, that's also why we tend to have trouble following multi-step directions. It's also why Post-it notes are helpful. Another fun fact about ADHD, not everyone with ADHD is hyperactive, at least not on the outside. ADHD has 3 different presentations, and they can change over time. So even if someone doesn't look like they have ADHD, they still might. Even if they're not bouncing around the room, their brain might be. It's often referred to as internal restlessness, and it's exhausting. Diana DeVader Murray explains her mind like being on a hamster wheel you can't ever get off of. Deborah Cradaville says it's like a pinball machine with the ball constantly hitting and bouncing between all the bumpers. All this energy can be great when we can direct it well. It often shows up as creativity, generosity, curiosity. We tend to think outside the box, and we're 3 times more likely to start our own business. But for us to take advantage of our brain's strengths, it's important that we learn to manage our ADHD, which often means using a combination of medication and other strategies. ADHD expert Dr. Ned Hallowell explains it like this. Having ADHD is like having a race car engine for a brain. It's very powerful, and it can propel you to win races. There's just one problem. You have bicycle brakes. But with the help of a brake specialist, you learn to strengthen your brakes and control that powerful engine. Then your race car stops spinning out on turns and starts winning races. Because we do tend to crash a lot while we're building up those brakes, those of us with ADHD tend to get corrected or teased more often than our peers. And unfortunately, another aspect of ADHD can make that extra painful for us. Our brains don't just have trouble regulating our attention, they have trouble regulating our emotions too. Jennifer Peterson explains, when it comes to emotional dysregulation, it's like I have a really bad sunburn. Even a playful slap on the back hurts.